Step away from that vehicle right now. Officer Daniel Reeves' voice cut through the late afternoon air like a siren, sharp, public, and impossible to ignore as every head in the parking lot turned toward the small figure standing beside a matte black SUV. Ava Johnson didn't flinch, not when the officer stepped closer, not when his shadow stretched over her sneakers, not even when he looked down at her with a smirk that didn't bother to hide what he was thinking. "That your mom's car?" he asked, loud enough for the growing crowd to hear. Ava nodded once, small but certain, her hands gripping the straps of her backpack like it was the only thing anchoring her in place. "She told me to wait right here," she said, her voice steady, almost too calm for a 10-year-old standing alone in a crowded lot with two patrol cars now idling behind her. Reeves let out a short laugh, shaking his head as he glanced at his partner. "Yeah? And what does your mom do, kid?" Ava met his eyes, no hesitation. "She's in Special Forces." The words landed, but instead of silence, they triggered something else, a ripple of amusement, a few chuckles from bystanders, someone muttering, "Sure she is," and Reeves didn't even try to hide it this time. He laughed, louder, sharper, like the idea itself was a joke worth sharing. "Special Forces?" he repeated, dragging the words out as if tasting how ridiculous they sounded to him. "That's cute," he said, straightening up and turning slightly so others could hear. "We've got a future storyteller here." A phone lifted somewhere in the crowd. Then another, lenses catching the moment as it unfolded. Ava didn't look around, didn't shrink, didn't argue. She just stood there, exactly where she was told to stand, her stillness almost out of place in the growing noise around her. Reeves circled slightly, his tone shifting from amused to official. "All right, here's what we're gonna do," he said, tapping his radio but not taking his eyes off her. "You're gonna step away from this vehicle until we figure out who it actually belongs to." The word actually hung heavier than it should have, like it carried more than just procedure. Ava didn't move. "My mom told me not to go anywhere," she said again, softer this time, but just as firm. Reeves exhaled through his nose, that patience-thinning sound of someone who thought they were dealing with a lie that needed correcting. "Kid," he said, lowering his voice just enough to sound controlled, but still loud enough for the cameras. "You don't want to make this harder than it needs to be." Behind him, his partner was already running the plates, the quiet crackle of the radio blending with the low hum of murmurs from the crowd. Someone whispered, "Why's he pressing her like that?" Another voice answered, "Because she's lying." Ava heard it, all of it, but her expression didn't change, not because she didn't feel it, but because she had heard tones like this before, not just from strangers, but from systems that decided who belonged before asking who someone was. Reeves glanced back as the radio responded, his partner's brow furrowed slightly. "No immediate record," he said, and that was all Reeves needed. His posture shifted, firmer now, more certain. "All right," he said, turning back to Ava. "That's what I thought." And just like that, the air changed. What started as a question became an assumption. What looked like a misunderstanding began to feel like something else entirely. And still, in the center of it all, Ava Johnson stood exactly where she was told, waiting, not for permission, not for approval, but for someone who hadn't arrived yet, someone she trusted enough to stand still for, no matter who was watching. Officer Daniel Reeves took a slow step back, not retreating but repositioning, like he was settling into a version of the situation that made more sense to him. One where he was right and the girl in front of him was not, his hand resting near his belt, not tense but deliberate, a posture that signaled control more than concern. "All right," he said again, louder this time, projecting past Ava and into the circle of people that had quietly formed around them. "We are going to verify everything. Before anyone touches this vehicle." His partner, Officer Mark Ellis, glanced up from the patrol car computer, his expression tighter now, less amused. "I am not getting a registered owner tied to this address," he said, and that sentence shifted the air even further. It gave Reeves something solid to stand on, something that sounded official, something that could turn suspicion into procedure. Reeves nodded once, then looked back at Ava. "You hear that?" he said, tilting his head slightly. "No record." He let the words sit for a second, then added, "So either your mom forgot to tell the government she exists, or you are standing next to a car that is not yours." A few people in the crowd exchanged glances, some skeptical, some uncomfortable. A man in a baseball cap muttered, That does not sound right. But he did not say it loud enough to interrupt. Ava's fingers tightened slightly around her backpack straps, not shaking, just holding, anchoring. She did not respond to the sarcasm, did not argue the logic. She just repeated the one thing that mattered to her. She told me to wait. Her voice was quieter now, but it did not break. It did not ask for permission. It stated a fact. Reeves exhaled again, longer this time. Like patience was something he had already decided he was running out of. Kid, listen to me, he said, crouching slightly, so he was closer to her level, but there was nothing gentle in the way he did it. If your mom was who you say she is, we would know. People like that do not just leave their kids standing alone in a parking lot. The phrase people like that landed heavier than he intended, or maybe exactly as he intended, because it carried an assumption that had nothing to do with databases or license plates. Behind Ava, a woman stepped a little closer, her phone still raised but her voice now audible. She said her mom told her to stay. Why is that so hard to believe? Reeves straightened up immediately, his attention snapping toward the voice. Ma'am, I need you to step back and let us handle this, he said, the tone shifting from dismissive to controlled authority, the kind that expected compliance, not conversation. The woman hesitated, then stepped back, but her camera did not lower, and neither did the tension. Ellis spoke again from behind the patrol car. Dispatch says the plate might be tied to a restricted registry, something federal, but it is not fully accessible from here. Reeves turned his head slowly, processing that, then looked back at Ava, his expression tightening just enough to show that the situation was no longer as simple as he first thought. But instead of easing, he leaned into it, doubling down. Restricted or not, that does not change what I am seeing right now, he said, gesturing lightly toward her. A minor, alone, making claims that do not check out. The word claims hung in the air like a label he had already decided to stick on her. Ava did not look at him this time. Her gaze fixed somewhere past him, toward the road, toward the entrance of the lot, like she was measuring something no one else could see yet. The crowd followed her line of sight for a moment, then back to Reeves, then back to her, uncertainty beginning to replace the earlier amusement. Reeves noticed it, and his voice sharpened just a fraction. We are not going to play games here, he said, louder again, reclaiming the space. If your parent is not here in the next few minutes, we are going to have to involve additional services to make sure you are safe. The word safe sounded correct, procedural, but the way it landed felt like a warning, not a reassurance. Ava finally blinked, slow and deliberate, and then she spoke, not louder, not emotional, just certain. She is already on her way. And for the first time since this started, Reeves did not immediately respond, because something in the way she said it did not sound like hope, it sounded like timing. Officer Daniel Reeves shifted his weight again, but this time it was not about control. It was about uncertainty creeping in at the edges of a situation he thought he had already defined, the kind of uncertainty that did not announce itself loudly, but instead settled into small details, like the way Ava Johnson was not looking at him anymore, not reacting to his words, not engaging with his authority, but focusing somewhere beyond him as if the outcome had already been decided and she was simply waiting for it to arrive. All right, Reeves said, his voice tightening just slightly as he turned toward his partner. Run it again. Full access if you can. Officer Mark Ellis nodded, already typing faster now, his earlier confidence replaced with a more cautious focus, the screen casting a faint glow across his face as lines of restricted prompts appeared and disappeared. I am trying, Ellis muttered, but it is flagging clearance limits. That word clearance did not go unnoticed, not by Reeves and not by the few people close enough to hear it. The murmurs shifted tone, less dismissive now, more curious. A man near the back lowered his phone just enough to whisper, "Did he just say clearance?" And the person beside him responded, "That does not sound like a random car." Reeves straightened up again, quicker this time, like he needed to regain the center of the moment before it drifted too far from him. "That does not change anything," he said, louder, projecting again. "We are still dealing with an unverified situation." The word unverified came out sharp, like a stamp he was determined to press down before anything else could complicate it. Ava remained still, her shoulders relaxed, her posture unchanged, and that stillness was beginning to do something unexpected. It was not calming the situation, it was amplifying it. because the contrast between her composure and the rising tension around her made everything else feel louder, more reactive, more uncertain. Reeves noticed it, even if he did not admit it, and he took a step closer again, not aggressive, but closer than before. Last time, he said, his voice lower now, but carrying further. Tell me your mother's name. Ava answered without hesitation. Captain Maya Johnson. The name landed differently than her earlier words. It was not a claim. It was specific, grounded, something that could be checked, something that could be confirmed or denied. Ellis paused mid-type, his eyes flicking up for a second before returning to the screen. His fingers moving again, faster now, searching deeper. Reeves caught that reaction. Just a flicker, but enough to register, and for the first time, he did not immediately respond with skepticism. Instead, he looked at Ava more carefully, as if reassessing what he had already decided. And where is she right now? He asked, and Ava's answer did not come with urgency or fear. It came with the same steady certainty she had held from the beginning. She is on her way, she said. Then after a brief pause, she told me to stay exactly here. The word exactly lingered, precise, intentional, not something a child guessed, something she was told, something she understood mattered. Ellis suddenly stopped typing altogether, his posture shifting, his shoulders tightening as he leaned closer to the screen. Reeves, he said quietly, not projecting this time, not performing, just speaking. I am getting something. Reeves turned his head, irritation and attention colliding in his expression. What is it? He asked. Ellis hesitated for half a second, then said, the name. It is flagged, not just restricted. It is tagged with a federal operations marker. The phrase hung in the air heavier than anything that had been said so far. It was not loud, but it carried weight, the kind that did not need volume to change a room. Reeves stared at him for a moment, processing, then glanced back at Ava, and in that brief exchange, something shifted, not fully, not enough to undo what had already happened, but enough to crack the certainty he had been standing on, and the crowd felt it too, the subtle change. The way the situation was no longer moving in one direction but beginning to tilt, slowly, towards something else. Ava did not react to any of it. She did not look at Ellis, did not acknowledge the shift. She just stood there, eyes still fixed toward the entrance of the lot, waiting, as if everything unfolding now was simply catching up to what she already knew. The words federal operations marker did not echo, but they settled into the space like a weight that everyone could feel even if only a few fully understood it. Officer Daniel Reeves did not repeat what his partner had said. He did not acknowledge it out loud, but the way his posture stiffened gave it away. The certainty he had been projecting was no longer solid. It was cracking, slowly, quietly, and the people watching could see it. A woman near the front lowered her phone just enough to whisper, something is not right here, and this time no one laughed, no one dismissed it, because the tone had shifted from curiosity to tension, the kind that builds when a situation starts to unravel in real time. Reeves cleared his throat and took a half step back, not retreating, just recalibrating. That does not change protocol, he said, his voice firm again, but missing the earlier edge. We still need to confirm identity before we assume anything. The word assume lingered, ironic now. Considering how much he had already decided without confirmation, Ava Johnson remained exactly where she had been, her sneakers planted on the asphalt, her backpack still held close, her expression unchanged. But inside that stillness was something deeper, something learned, something practiced, because this was not the first time she had been told to wait while someone else questioned what should not have been questioned. She remembered a different moment, not here, not now, but close enough to feel. An airport terminal 2 years earlier, bright lights, long lines, her mother standing calm, while an agent asked the same questions 3 different ways, not because the answers were unclear, but because the person asking did not expect them to be true. Ava had stood beside her. Then too, watching, learning, not from what her mother said, but from what she did not say, from the way she did not raise her voice, did not rush, did not shrink, just stood still and let the system catch up to the truth. And now, standing in this parking lot, that memory sat quietly in her chest, not as fear, but as instruction. Do not move, do not react. Wait. Officer Mark Ellis leaned closer to his radio now, lowering his voice. Dispatch, I need higher clearance verification on a flagged identity. Name is Captain Maya Johnson. There was a pause, longer than before, the kind that stretched just enough to make people notice. Reeves glanced toward him again, this time without speaking, his jaw tightening slightly as he waited. The crowd leaned in, not physically, but in attention, phones still raised, eyes fixed, the moment pulling everyone into the same question. Then the radio responded, not loud, but clear enough for Ellis to hear, and whatever came through changed his expression immediately. His shoulders straightened, his eyes flicked to Reeves, then back to the device, as if confirming he had heard it correctly. Copy, Ellis said, his voice more controlled now, more careful, and when he looked up again, there was something different in his face, not fear, not exactly, but awareness, the kind that comes when a situation is no longer what it seemed. Reeves noticed it instantly. What did they say? He asked, this time quieter. Ellis hesitated, just for a second, then replied. They said to hold position and not escalate. The phrase landed heavier than anything before, because it did not just suggest uncertainty, it implied instruction from somewhere higher, somewhere outside their control. Reeves looked back at Ava. Really looked this time, not at her clothes, not at her size, but at her stillness, her certainty, the way. She had not wavered once, and for the first time since he had raised his voice at her, he did not speak immediately. The silence stretched, filled only by the low hum of engines and the faint sound of distant traffic. And then, almost as if the scene itself was responding, a new sound entered, subtle at first, the distant approach of a vehicle moving with purpose, not fast, not loud, but steady, deliberate. And Ava's eyes shifted just slightly, not surprised, not relieved, just aligned, like the moment she had been waiting for had finally reached the edge of the scene. The sound grew clearer now, no longer a distant hum, but a presence approaching with quiet authority, a dark vehicle turning into the lot with a precision that did not draw attention by force but commanded it anyway. Heads turned before anyone said a word, not because they were told to, but because something about the movement felt intentional, controlled, different. Ava Johnson did not move, not even as the vehicle rolled to a smooth stop several yards away, her posture unchanged, her gaze steady, as if the timing matched something she had already accepted long before anyone else realized what was happening. Officer Daniel Reeves noticed the shift immediately, his eyes tracking the vehicle, his body adjusting instinctively, the kind of reaction that comes from training meeting uncertainty. Stay where you are, he said, but this time the words were not directed at Ava alone. They were for the scene, for the moment. For himself, Officer Mark Ellis stepped away from the patrol car. Slightly, his radio still in hand, his attention now split between the confirmation he had received and the new variable entering the space. The vehicle engine cut off with a soft finality, and for a brief second, everything seemed to pause. Conversations halted, phones steadied. Even the low background noise of the parking lot felt like it dimmed. Then the driver's side door opened, slow, controlled, not rushed. A single movement that shifted the air more than any raised voice had before. A boot touched the pavement first, polished but practical, followed by the rest of the figure stepping out with a posture that carried no hesitation, no need to prove anything, only presence. Captain Maya Johnson did not look around immediately. She closed the door behind her with a quiet click and took a single step forward, her eyes scanning the scene once, not searching, assessing. And in that glance, something became clear to everyone watching. She was not walking into confusion. She was walking into a situation she already understood. Reeves straightened instinctively, his shoulders pulling back slightly, not in submission, but in recognition that the balance of the moment had shifted. Ellis lowered his radio, just a fraction, his earlier caution now turning into something closer to certainty, the kind that comes when information aligns with reality. Ava finally moved. But it was not a step, not a run, just a slight release of tension in her shoulders, the smallest change, almost invisible, but enough to show that the waiting was over. Maya's gaze landed on her daughter first, not the officers, not the crowd, Ava, and for a brief moment, everything else in the parking lot felt secondary. You stayed, Maya said, her voice calm, even, not loud, but it carried across the space with clarity. Ava nodded once. You told me to. she replied, and that exchange, simple as it was, held more weight than the entire confrontation that had built around it. Maya gave a small nod in return, acknowledgement, not relief. Then her attention shifted, not abruptly, but deliberately, toward Officer Reeves, and when her eyes met his, there was no anger, no raised voice, just a level, measured look that forced the moment to slow down, to be seen for what it was. Reeves opened his mouth as if to speak, but paused, recalculating, because whatever he had been certain about before no longer held the same ground. The crowd felt it too, the subtle collapse of assumption, the quiet realignment of authority, and standing there between the officers, the vehicle, and the watching eyes, Captain Maya Johnson did not need to announce who she was, because everything about the way she stood, the way she looked, and the way the situation had shifted around her had already said it. Maya Johnson did not rush her next step. She moved forward with a calm that did not ask for space but created it, the distance between her and Officer Daniel Reeves closing in measured strides, each one steady, deliberate, the kind of movement that carried its own authority without needing reinforcement. Reeves held his position, but the shift in his posture was undeniable now, the certainty that had once defined him replaced by a careful awareness. "Ma'am," he began, his tone adjusting, searching for footing. "We were just trying to verify." Maya raised her hand slightly, not abruptly, not dismissively, but enough to pause the sentence before it could complete itself. "You already did more than verify," she said, her voice even, controlled, not loud, but carrying across the same space his had filled minutes earlier, and the contrast between them was immediate. Where his voice had pushed, hers settled. Where his had assumed, hers stated. Reeves stopped speaking, not because he was told to, but because there was nothing in her tone that invited interruption. Officer Mark Ellis stepped forward slightly, his earlier hesitation now replaced with a quiet respect. "Captain Johnson," he said, nodding once, acknowledging not just her presence, but her identity. And that acknowledgement did something the crowd could feel even if they did not fully understand it. It confirmed what had only been suggested before. It turned uncertainty into fact. Maya gave a brief nod in return, then looked back at Reeves, her attention focused, precise. "You questioned my daughter's presence, her statement, and her credibility," she said, each word placed carefully, not rushed, not emotional, just clear. Reeves shifted his weight, his earlier confidence now fully replaced with something closer to defense. "We had a report of an unverified situation," he replied, choosing his words more carefully now. "And we followed protocol to ensure safety." The word safety returned, but this time it did not land the same way, because the context around it had changed. Maya held his gaze for a moment, long enough for the silence to stretch just slightly, long enough for the people watching to feel the weight of what had already happened. "Protocol does not begin with dismissal," she said, her voice still calm, still measured, but sharper now in its precision. "And it certainly does not begin with assumption." The word assumption echoed quietly, not repeated loudly, but understood by everyone who had been there from the start. Reeves did not respond immediately, his eyes flicking briefly toward the crowd, toward the phones still raised, toward the witnesses who had seen the entire exchange unfold, and then back to Maya. "We did not know who she was," he said, and that sentence, meant as explanation, landed closer to confession. Maya's expression did not change, but her next words cut through the space with clarity. "That is exactly the point," she said, not louder, but stronger. "You did not know, and yet you decided." The crowd shifted again, not physically, but in understanding. The narrative that had once been controlled by authority was now being redefined by truth. Ava stood just behind her mother, silent, watching. Her earlier stillness now mirrored in Maya's presence. Not fear, not uncertainty, just control, the kind that did not need to raise its voice to be heard. Ellis glanced at Reeves briefly, then back at Maya, his posture straighter now, aligned with the reality of the situation rather than the assumption it had started with. Reeves exhaled slowly, the sound quieter this time, less performative, more real, as if the weight of the moment had finally settled where it belonged. And in that space, with the crowd watching, the officers standing, and the truth fully present, Maya Johnson did not need to escalate. She simply stood there, holding the moment in place until it could no longer be shaped by anything other than what it was. Maya Johnson let the silence sit just long enough to settle over the parking lot. Not as tension this time, but as clarity, the kind that comes when a moment can no longer hide behind confusion. Officer Daniel Reeves shifted again, but there was no authority left in the movement, only adjustment, recalibration, the kind that happens when the ground you were standing on is no longer where you thought it was. He glanced briefly toward Officer Mark Ellis, then back at Maya, searching for something to say that could restore control, but the moment had already moved past that point. "Captain," he began again, more careful now. There was no intent to. Maya spoke before he could finish, not cutting him off sharply, but redirecting the path of the conversation entirely. "Intent does not erase impact," she said, her voice still calm, still steady, but now carrying a weight that did not need volume to be understood. The words settled into the space like a line that could not be stepped back. "Over," Reeves stopped, his mouth closing slowly as the sentence he had started lost its purpose. The crowd felt it, that shift from explanation to accountability. Phone still raised but no longer searching for drama, now capturing something else. Something quieter but far more defining. Maya turned slightly, just enough to include the space around her, the people watching, the officers standing, the situation as a whole. "You did not ask her what she needed," she continued, her tone unchanged. "You told her what she could not be." The statement hung there, simple but precise, and it reframed everything that had happened from the first moment Reeves had raised his voice. Ava stood beside her, not hidden, not shielded, but included, her presence no longer questioned, no longer uncertain, just present. Reeves exhaled again, slower this time, the sound no longer sharp but subdued. "We responded to what we saw," he said, and even as he said it, the words felt smaller, less certain. Maya met his gaze without hesitation. "No," she replied. "You responded to what you assumed." And there it was, the line that closed the gap between action and truth, not loud, not dramatic, but final, the kind of statement that did not escalate the moment but defined it. Ellis lowered his radio completely now, his posture fully aligned with the reality in front of him, no longer divided between protocol and perception, just present, just aware. The crowd shifted again, a quiet ripple of understanding moving through them, not loud enough to interrupt, but strong enough to be felt. Someone in the back whispered. She never raised her voice, and another answered. She did not need to. Reeves looked around briefly, not searching for support, but recognizing the weight of the moment beyond himself. Then back at Maya, and for the first time since this began, he nodded, small, controlled, not a performance, but acknowledgement. "Understood," he said, the word simple, but carrying more than anything he had said before. Maya held his gaze for a moment longer, then gave a slight nod in return, not approval, not dismissal, just recognition that the moment had reached its conclusion. Ava looked up at her mother, and in that glance there was no fear, no confusion, just understanding. The same lesson she had seen before. Standing still was not weakness. It was strength held in place long enough for the truth to arrive. And now that it had, there was nothing left for the moment to be except what it was, seen, understood, and no longer defined by the assumptions that had started it. The shift was no longer subtle now. It was visible, undeniable, moving through the parking lot like a quiet wave that changed everything it touched. Officer Daniel Reeves took a small step back, not out of instruction but out of instinct, the kind that comes when the role you thought you held no longer fits the moment you were standing in. His shoulders lowered slightly, his stance no longer squared for control but adjusted for presence. Officer Mark Ellis clipped his radio back onto his belt with a deliberate motion, the device that had carried authority minutes ago now silent against his uniform, no longer needed to define what was already clear. The crowd did not disperse, not yet, but the energy within it shifted. Phones that had once been raised to capture conflict were now held steady to witness resolution. A man near the front shook his head slowly, not in disbelief but in recognition. That changed fast, he muttered, and someone beside him replied quietly, "No, it was always like this, we just did not see it yet." Maya Johnson turned slightly toward Ava, her posture softening just enough to acknowledge the end of the tension. without breaking the control she had held throughout. "Come here," she said, not as a command, but as a simple invitation. Ava stepped forward this time, closing the small distance between them, her movement calm, measured, the same way she had stood, and when she reached her mother's side. She did not rush into her, did not collapse into relief. She just stood there, aligned, steady, as if this moment was not about escape, but about completion. Maya placed a hand lightly on Ava's shoulder, not protective, not defensive, just present, a quiet confirmation that she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Reeves watched the exchange for a moment, then looked away briefly, the weight of the situation settling more fully now, not as pressure, but as understanding. He cleared his throat again, softer this time. "You are free to go," he said. And the words, though simple, carried a different tone than anything he had said before. They were not an instruction, not a dismissal, but a release of something that should not have been held in the first place. Maya glanced at him, not sharply, not dismissively, just acknowledging the statement for what it was, then gave a small nod, not as acceptance, but as closure. Ellis stepped back fully now, creating space without being asked, his posture open, no longer guarding a situation that no longer needed control. The crowd began to shift, slowly, people lowering their phones, some exchanging looks, others quietly stepping away, the moment no longer escalating, no longer uncertain, just resolved. A woman who had been filming from the beginning lowered her phone completely and said under her breath, "She never argued once," and another voice responded, "She did not have to." Ava looked up at her mother again. "Can we go now?" she asked, her voice the same as before, steady, unaffected. Maya gave a slight smile, not wide, not dramatic, just enough to show that the answer had always been yes. "We can," she replied, and together they turned toward the vehicle, not hurried, not lingering, just moving forward, leaving behind a space that had been filled with noise, assumption, and tension, now replaced with something quieter, something clearer. And as the door opened and closed once more, the engine starting with the same calm certainty it had arrived with, the parking lot returned to its normal rhythm. But the moment that had unfolded there did not disappear. It stayed, not in volume, not in spectacle, but in understanding, carried by everyone who had seen it for what it truly was. The vehicle pulled out of the parking lot with the same quiet precision it had arrived with, tires rolling over asphalt as if the ground itself had already made space for it. And for a moment, no one spoke, not the crowd, not the officers, not even the distant noise of passing cars seemed to fill what had just been left behind, because something had shifted that could not be undone by movement alone. Officer Daniel Reeves stood where he was, his gaze following the direction of the vehicle long after it had turned out of sight, his posture no longer defined by authority or urgency, but by reflection, the kind that settles in after the moment has already passed. Officer Mark Ellis remained beside him, arms relaxed at his sides, his earlier focus on protocol replaced by a quieter awareness. The two of them did not speak immediately, not because there was nothing to say, but because what needed to be understood could not be rushed into words. Around them, the crowd began to dissolve, slowly at first, then more naturally, people returning to their routines, conversations picking back up in softer tones. But even as they walked away, many glanced back once more, not at the officers, not at the empty space where the vehicle had been, but at the memory of what had just unfolded. A woman who had recorded the entire exchange lowered her phone fully and shook her head, not in disbelief, but in recognition. "It was never about the car," she said quietly, and the person beside her nodded. "It was about what they thought they saw, and that was the part that stayed, not the raised voices, not the tension, but the moment it became clear that perception had spoken louder than truth." Reeves finally exhaled, longer than before, his shoulders dropping slightly, as if the weight of the situation had settled into something he could not ignore. "We need to log this properly," Ellis said, his voice steady, not defensive, not dismissive, just clear. Reeves nodded. Once, a small motion, but deliberate. "Yeah," he replied, and there was no resistance in it, no attempt to reshape what had happened into something easier to carry, just acknowledgement, because the moment had already defined itself. It did not need interpretation, it needed recognition. And as they turned back toward their patrol cars, The space behind them felt different, not louder, not quieter, just clearer, like something had been revealed that could not be unseen, miles away, inside the moving vehicle. Ava Johnson sat in the passenger seat, looking out the window as the city passed by in familiar lines and steady motion. She was not shaken, not overwhelmed, just thoughtful, the kind of quiet processing that comes after understanding settles in. "You did exactly what I told you," Maya said, her eyes still on the road, her voice calm, the same tone she had used in the parking lot. Ava nodded slightly. "You said to stay and not argue," she replied. Maya gave a small nod in return. "Because not every moment is about proving who you are," she said, her words steady, measured. "Sometimes it is about letting the truth arrive on its own." Ava looked at her mother then. Really looked, the same way she had in that parking lot. And in that glance there was no confusion, no doubt, just understanding, the kind that does not come from explanation alone, but from witnessing it in real time. Maya continued. "People will decide things about you before they know anything about you," she said. "That is not your responsibility to fix in the moment." She paused briefly, then added, "But it is your responsibility to stand in who you are long enough for it to be seen." Ava leaned back slightly in her seat, the lesson settling into her the same way the moment had unfolded, not loud, not dramatic, just clear. And outside the vehicle, the world moved on as it always did, traffic flowing, people walking, conversations continuing, but somewhere between that parking lot and this road, something had shifted, not just in what had happened, but in what had been understood, because the truth had not needed to raise its voice. It had only needed to arrive, and when it did, everything else had no choice but to move out of its way.